Thank you for watching this show on One Africa. Because you are part of our One family, your voice is very important to us. Please take a moment to rate this show by scanning the QR code on your screen now, and you can stand a chance to win fantastic prizes every month. T's and C's apply.
Got your feel-good vibes.
99 FM.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this edition of the Business Brief, the show where we focus on news worth knowing on a local, regional, and global level affecting the Namibian economy and you as a citizen. I am your presenter, Morna Ikosa. In this episode, we will again be looking at business news that made headlines in the online newspaper The Brief. And after that, we'll be discussing ShopRite expanding to include selling clothes and how it will impact the clothing industry in Namibia. First up though, we're going for a commercial break and then we'll be right back.
So, you had a super awesome holiday with loads of new shows and little buddies thanks to your free package upgrade. Well, the halls may be over, but no worries, because we're keeping the laughter and learning rolling.
Yes!
Bam! Simply upgrade your DSTV package now, and we'll bump you up to the next package.
Thanks, my hearties. I like the future.
For example, if you're on the DSTV Access package, all you need to do is upgrade to DSTV Family, and we'll bump you up to DSTV Compact at no extra cost.
That's great. Awesome. Oh, yeah.
Another super cool offer to keep the awesomeness going wherever, whenever.
You want to run?
Only from DSTV.
Welcome back. It's time for a look at the business news making headlines in the online newspaper, The Brief. One development that is making news in The Brief concerns horticulture prices in Namibia. On average, farm gate prices for various horticulture products have decreased by 4.6% on an annual basis in September 2022. At the same time, average retail prices have increased by 25%. On average, retailers charge 2.7 times more than what farmers charge, with the largest retailer premium being recorded on items such as butternut. This is a clear indication of abuse of market power. And joining us in the studio to talk about that and its impact is Theo Klein, an economist at Simony Storm Securities. Welcome to the studio, Theo.
Thanks for having me, Morna. It's good to be here.
I'm really excited. So tell me, Theo, this phenomena, what is causing these really very clear, distinct variations in prices?
So we noticed it in the data that we get from the Namibia Agronomic Board, Morna, where they frequently publish these prices. And I mean, as you said earlier, and for September alone, we saw farm gate prices decreasing, but retail prices increasing. Other months in this year, we see that your farm gate prices and retail prices both drop, but maybe farm gate prices drop 5%, but retail prices only drop 2%. So be it as it may, we do still see that discrepancy in the movements between farm gate and retail prices. So we have engaged a few farmers, and just to ask, what could potentially be driving this in the data. And the answer is that, the farmer struggles to get his or her price with the wholesaler. So in this sense, the wholesaler is sort of forcing the farmer to push down his or her price. And, and they just can't get the price that they want to charge. And this is problematic because since the war outbreak in Ukraine, we've seen fertilizer prices increasing significantly. Diesel prices increased over 50% compared to levels we saw in 2021. So the farmer saw a significant increase in his or her input costs. But then at the same time, he or she can't get the price that they want to charge. And I think to some extent, we then realize that there must be some abuse of market power with a wholesaler. In Namibia, we know that roughly 80% of Namibians are dependent on formal marketplaces to buy their daily food. So what that means is about 80% of Namibians buy their food at a grocery store. So as Checkers, a ShopRite, a Spar, and so forth. So in that sense, your farmer is very dependent on the wholesaler buying his harvest and then selling it to the retailers across the country, because otherwise the farmer is going to struggle to get access to the consumer directly. And I think, Morna, it's quite interesting to see. I mean, I camp frequently, so I drive throughout Namibia, but also here in Windhoek, you see more and more informal trading taking place next to the street.
Exactly.
Where people sit under an umbrella or a gazebo and they sell their fruits and vegetables. And I think that's that's a sign of frustration from farmers, and now they're trying to exclude the wholesaler and the retailer in the value chain, and they are trying to get access directly to the consumer.
But tell me quickly, Theo, just to and I love how you mentioned these informal traders on the side of the road. I remember when I was studying in Cape Town, my largest portion, obviously you're on a student budget, but I still ate well because I was able to buy my food at the informal traders. But in Namibia, that's sort of looked down on. So you would still find people who wouldn't necessarily go, and they would drive past those traders and still go to the bigger retailers. So how do we then start inculcating a culture where we also now start recognizing those informal traders as people with the same quality of vegetables or fruits?
Yeah, I mean, it's sad to say, as you say, people drive past and still go to shops. I think for us in general to change our perspective on these informal stalls next to the street, probably they might have to look to package their products a bit better, just so that it looks easier or nicer on the eye, just to give them the idea, or customers the idea, that it is clean, and these fruits and vegetables are not just lying next to this road with insects and so forth running all over them, or whatever the case may be, just to maybe try and give the customer more confidence that the product is clean and safe to consume. I think the other thing is the choice of where they choose to stand.
Right.
Sometimes I do find that, I see watermelons next to the street and I wouldn't actually mind stopping to buy. But then the problem is it's not at a good location for me to stop my car and stop it and buy at the store. The other problem is, Morna, typically with crime being higher throughout Africa, not so much a problem in Namibia, but we do have theft issues now and again. A lot of people don't want to hold onto cash.
True.
So the other problem would be is if we can have fintech solutions come into play to allow, so if I stop next to the store, I should be allowed to either tap my card or, these days I see my sister tapping her cell phone in South Africa.
Sure.
And she can make a payment just like that with her cell phone. So I think if we can have fintech solutions that allows me to buy without cash, I think that will also definitely boost sales for these informal traders. I think, Mona, just to get back to the discrepancy between retailers and the farm gate,
right.
What's very interesting is that You see green peppers, farmers get $13 per kilogram. The retailer charges $63 per kilogram. So that's almost 5 times, 6 times the price that the farmer gets. Sweet potato, another example. The farmer gets $9 per kilogram. The retailer charges $36 per kilogram.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to some extent you can argue, okay, what if wholesalers are adding value to the food products between the farmer and then the retailer's shelves?
Right.
But I don't know about you, Mona, but when I go to Checkers or Spar, I frequently find onions or potatoes and sweet potatoes just loosely packed in a crate or a box. And I have to hand pick my potatoes, put it in a plastic bag, have it weighed, and they charge me a price. So what value addition really is the wholesaler doing to that potato, for example?
True.
And then, on average, as you mentioned earlier, the retailer charges 2.7 times more. So, can you really justify charging so much more than the farmer if I still handpick the potato out of a box in your shop? So, and that led us to talk to some of the retailers locally, where they say that sometimes they too can't charge the price that they want. It's set by the wholesaler. So it does seem to me that the culprit in the value chain between farmer and consumer seems to be the wholesaler. And that's why we come to the conclusion, or the idea rather, that it could be the wholesaler abusing his market power.
So just to round up, how do we then, where's the Namibian Competition Commission in this? How do we protect the farmers? How do we protect the consumers? Especially given the fact that we are recognizing that there is some form of abuse of market power.
So we were willing to write a report on this, Mona, backed by statistics, and write a report as an independent researcher. Farmers, however, are not always too keen to pay us for that report.
Of course.
But I think my understanding is that some farmers have complained about this to the government, specifically Ministry of Agriculture. But to date, not much has been done. My suspicion is that government would need to step in to try and address this problem. We know farmers formed an association in 2021.
Right.
Probably that association would need to have one voice on behalf of all farmers against government to try and address this problem. But to date, we've not really seen such intervention from government side, or not that we are aware of at least.
Right. We'll definitely be following through with that story through the year, just to see the developments, because it's a very, very interesting topic, and I think it will really impact a lot of people.
Yeah.
So with that, we're quickly going for another commercial break, and we'll return and we'll be discussing ShopRite venturing into the clothing sector with our guest economist from Simini Storm Securities, Theo Klein, and how this move will impact the clothing industry in Namibia and, of course, your pocket.
Picked up nicely there by Devin Lacob.
Oh, beats the bat with the next delivery.
Lofty Eaton hits that one over mid-wicket, and it has enough. Up in the air, this one clears, and some less! 6 runs! Great pick! Really well done.
Welcome back. The second-hand clothing sector in Namibia is growing at an accelerated rate. Those who were unemployed are now becoming instant entrepreneurs and improving their lives and those of their families by buying second-hand clothes in bulk and then reselling those items. However, South Africa's biggest retailer, ShopRite, recently announced that it will expand into the clothing sector by opening at least 10 to 12 clothing stores next year, after having recently launched a low-cost banking service and also branched out into pet and camping and baby goods. What will this expansion mean for the informal clothing vendors who import second-hand clothing to sell at more affordable prices? Does Namibia have more room for clothing retailers given the population size? Here to explore this topic is Theo Klein, our guest economist at Simini Storm Securities. Theo, we're at it again. So tell me, why has there been a surge of second-hand clothing in Namibia recently?
I think, Mona, the economic environment that we're in could probably explain a great deal of that. It's just since 2015, we have seen our economy not growing at rates that we were used to in our booming years in the early 2000s. So I think over time, as unemployment has increased, salaries maybe not keeping pace with actual inflation on the ground, all of that I think could have led to people searching for alternatives, cheaper alternatives. I think especially now with the war that broke out in Ukraine in early 2022, we've seen a significant increase in inflation from food to fuel prices, furniture prices, alcohol prices, that we've seen significant increases. So I think your average Namibian's household budget is under significant pressure.
True.
Adding on top of that, we also saw significant increases in our interest rates. So obviously, with the average Namibian household having about 6 months' debt, 6 months' salary in debt, naturally higher interest rates automatically places a strain on their finances. So I think in the midst of all of this, I think that's why more and more people are searching for alternatives and trying to save money wherever they can. Not just with clothes, I see with food that we discussed earlier, we also see more and more informal food stalls. So I think this is a way for Namibians to try and save money and seek out cheaper alternatives.
Sure. So tell me, with ShopRite now, I mean, with the news that ShopRite is starting or expanding in the clothing industry, what if that had to come to Namibia, what impact do you think it would have on those selling informally?
Yeah, I think, Mona, I see both good and bad impacts. I think to start off with the good impacts, I don't know how big these stalls or these clothing sections will be within ShopRite stores, but it could be that there's more jobs being created for people to be sales assistants within the clothing section. Also, just maybe you need more truck drivers to transport the clothes from South Africa to Windhoek, and then from there across Namibia. So there could be some jobs being created. In economic theory, we always say that the more choice a consumer has, the happier he or she should be. So I think it does provide more variety, and in that way, consumers should sort of be happy, but just based on basic economic theory that we have. And I think also with more competition being or in the clothing sector, it can also mean that maybe we see prices of clothing decrease because ShopRite will be competing with the likes of Pick and Pay clothing,
Right.
Maybe Jet and Pep as well.
True.
So there is fierce competition. So they definitely will not, their prices will be determined by the existing competition. So I think just normal economic theory would also tell you that the more competitors you have, the more likely it is that prices should decline. So that should then benefit consumers. I think the one negative that I do see, Mona, is that it is another South African retailer. I would have liked to see a Namibian retailer selling Namibian designed clothes or clothes that at least have been manufactured within our country. So, more, that means we'll import more from South Africa, which is negative for our trade balance being exports minus imports. So essentially, as we buy more from the rest of the world, more money will be leaving the system, which is obviously also a negative for us.
I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why I really just wanted to find out whether there's really room for another clothing retailer in Namibia, given our 2.5, 2.8 population.
Yeah, I think in my personal view, Mona, the clothing sector is already oversaturated. What I mean by that is there's too many players in the market.
Right.
So, I mean, we also have cheap imports from China. We also know of NGOs and churches across the world who donate clothes to Namibians, and then that actually gets sold in the second-hand market, which is probably not the right thing to do. But, so I think there is an oversupply of clothes in Namibia. Essentially, globally, we do know that there is an oversupply of clothes as well. So, but what I do think, though, is that we could do with more retailers with different styles of clothing.
Right.
But I think at the moment, I would say there's not really too much room for another retailer in our small market.
No, thank you for that very useful information. We're going for a quick break, but we'll be right back.
set to take the African continent and the world by storm. They are giants in every sense of the word, and they will bring entertainment that's just as big. Don't miss the first ever season of Big Brother Titans with two African giants, Niger and Nsamse, under Biggie's roof together. Big Brother Titans starts on Sunday, 15th of January on GoTV and African Magic channels. Big Brother Titans is rated 18. Proudly sponsored by Bamboo and Flutterwave.
Yepa, Yvette burned down my coffee shop.
And plus, we both know that it was an out-of-this-world experience.
I don't need to explain anything to you.
She's not carrying your baby, Thomas.
Is there something going on between the two of you?
No.
She was caught doing what?
She was racing in the streets, man.
Grace, this is the last time you misbehave like this. Or else what? Don't you dare talk back to me, child.
The pain of losing a daughter you never had.
99 FM's got your feel good vibes.
99 FM.
Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion on ShopRite venturing into the clothing sector and how this move will impact the clothing industry in Namibia. So tell me quickly, Theo, how can those in the informal sector enter the formal market? And I love this when you said that you would have loved to see more Namibians, actually opening up clothes. How would you then help those guys in the informal to move to formal?
Okay. I think, so we do know in Namibia that SMEs struggle to get access to financing. Our local commercial banks just see too much risk with them, which is sad because that's typically where most of the growth and employment comes from.
True.
If we look at global research in other countries and so forth. So I think one option might be still the Development Bank of Namibia, being sort of backed by government to some extent. I think one could still try and approach them for a loan to start to open a shop or to start your own clothing business. I think I studied in Cape Town for a few years, and I remember a shop with the name of YDE, the Young Designers Emporium. And I like that business model where a few designers, local designers who strictly speaking are competing against one another,
True.
but they then come together and collaborate. And they pool their money together, similarly to what a stokvel would do. You pool savings together, and with that lump sum, you try and open your own shop. And in that way, Namibian designers have a physical shop for themselves, and each designer maybe has their own aisle in this shop and to showcase their work or to try and sell their products. I think that could probably be done instead of where each designer tries to do their own thing. I think rather don't see the, other designers as competition, rather collaborate and work alongside them. I think there is room for something like that. I think also maybe vocational training is so important in Namibia given our large unskilled population. I think it's always good to just try and upskill yourself to make sure that your products are also of good quality.
Right.
That you could maybe try and get your products onto the shelves of some retailers. And I mean, we know the retail industry in Namibia is dominated by South African franchises. But I think that could probably also be an option. But then obviously you're competing with very high quality clothes that are being manufactured in South Africa or even imported from Europe but then sent to Namibia. So you'll definitely have to upskill yourself as well if you want to be taken seriously in the formal market.
Sure. Do you think ShopRite will be able to compete with the low prices that are already sort of here in that is offered by the informal sector?
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a difficult question, but I think, my understanding is that ShopRite probably targets the lower middle income segment of the market. I don't know if the informal sector, typically it would target lower income individuals. But, so given that they are targeting different segments of the market, it might be that they don't compete with one another directly. The one problem is also if I'm a loyal ShopRite customer, if that's the typical place where I buy my groceries, I mean, if I'm walking around buying food, but I see nice clothing items hanging around in their clothing section, I obviously might make my way there and buy from them as well. But how I know Namibians is that we value relationships. So if you buy clothes in the informal sector from an auntie or an uncle that you know personally well, they maybe know your style, they know what you like, and so they can source the stock that they know you might actually want to buy. It can be, and we also maybe have a good personal relationship. It can also be that I rather still prefer the informal trader as opposed to buying clothes from ShopRite. So I might, because of that cultural characteristic of Namibians, I'm not too sure if if ShopRite, might compete directly with the informal traders.
And just our last question, what is your view on the retail sector contribution to the economic growth of the country going forward?
So I think one thing that's interesting there is that COVID certainly was very tragic in causing an increase in the number of deaths. But at the same time, we've seen that actually, that could have benefited a lot of people financially in the form of long-term or life insurance policy payouts. So when looking at data from NAMFISA, we see that between the first quarter of 2020 and the first quarter of 2022, just under 20 billion Namibian dollars have been paid out from life insurance policies.
Sure.
So not all of it could have been as a result of deaths, so that life cover policies are paying out. It could also have been sickness or disability policies. But certainly 20 billion is a large amount of money. It's roughly 15% of our economy size. And that being paid out as tax-free money directly into people's hands, surely that money must go somewhere.
True.
So, we expect that money could then filter through to the retail sector. Already when we talk to brands such as Mercedes, BMW, Jaguar, your higher-end car brands, before the pandemic, they had 60% loan sales, 40% cash sales. At the moment, they're doing about 70% cash sales, 30% loan sales.
Oh my gosh, okay.
So, if someone is buying a 1.4 million BMW cash, certainly you wonder where the money is coming from.
Yeah.
But then if we look at the data from NAMFISA, from the life insurance policy payouts, it could probably explain a great part of that picture. So how long does it take for 20 billion to be spent, Morna? Knowing our culture, probably not too long. But I guess that 20 billion should then filter through, probably for 2023 and maybe still 2024, to benefit the retail sector, whether it's cars, clothes, furniture, or appliances that people are buying. Surely that money must be spent somewhere. So I think we are quite positive on the retail sector, cautiously positive, because obviously we know financial times are quite tough for the general household. But I think that's why we would probably have a cautiously optimistic view on the retail sector to stimulate economic activity in the next year or two.
Wow. Thank you, Theo, for joining us into the studio to really talk about the ShopRite venturing into the clothing sector, and of course also really just understanding the abuse of market power happening in the horticulture sector.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was really great, and I'm looking forward to having you back in studio.
I'll be happy to be here.
Right. Just before we say goodbye, let's have a look at the economic indicators. And that brings us to the end of this edition of the Business Brief. Thank you for watching. We trust that you